I bid you welcome.
To a new world of gods and monsters.
How do you like that, eh?
Even a man who's pure at heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the moon is full and bright.
I love dead, hate living.
It's a perfect night for mystery and horror. The air itself is filled with monsters.
The monsters are like family to so many of us. We see traces of ourselves reflected in these characters that have become far larger than anyone could have imagined. Each film and character means something different to each individual, but the overall themes of the monsters are what tie us fans together as something much larger than ourselves. We are the monsters, and we are family. But that family has a root. A single father that breathed life into the family tree we now identify with. Carl Laemmle. I'm Ian the Wolfman, and this is the Monster Archives. Carl Laemmle was born on January 17, 1867, in Laufheim, Kingdom of Württemberg, which is now Germany, to Julius Baruch Laemmle and Rebecca Laemmle, a Jewish couple in the Radstrasse, a street in the Jewish quarter. Julius was a cattle merchant while also involved in land transactions. The Laemmles lived in poverty, Carl being one of 11 children, of which only 3 reached adulthood. Carl was one of the youngest children and particularly close with his mother. At the age of 13, she arranged a 3-year apprenticeship for him in the nearby village of Eichenhausen. He learned accounting and sales and worked to support the family. Rebecca died in 1883, and Carl decided to immigrate to the United States for a better life. For his 17th birthday, his father gifted him a ticket aboard the steamboat SS Neckar and $50. Carl left Bremerhaven on January 28, 1884, and crossed the Atlantic, landing in New York on February 14th the same year. He settled in Chicago, first entering the haberdashery business as a bookkeeper and office manager. Carl lived in Chicago for 20 years, becoming a naturalized citizen in 1889. By 1894, he was the bookkeeper of the Continental Clothing Company in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. The earliest motion picture theaters were called Nickelodeons, a name that referred to the price of the ticket. Nickelodeons were usually small storefronts containing typically fewer than 200 hard-wooden chairs with a screen hung upon a wall on which the one reel fare of the day would be projected. Carl became captivated with motion pictures after entering a Nickelodeon himself one day. In 1906, at the age of 39, Carl Laemmle quit his job. Initially, he wished to open a network of cheap retail stores, but ultimately decided to open his own theater. He started one of the first motion picture theaters in Chicago, the White Front Theater on Milwaukee Avenue, in February 1906. It would be the first in a nationwide chain of Nickelodeons called the Laemmle Film Service. Laemmle soon branched out into film exchange services, renting out films to theaters. In building his successful chain, Laemmle became a target of the monopolistic organization called the Motion Picture Patents Company, or MPPC, also known as the Edison Trust. The trust was founded in December 1908 and encompassed all of the major U.S. film companies and local foreign branches, the leading film distributor, and the biggest supplier of raw film stock. It was headed by Thomas Edison. Laemmle challenged the MPPC under the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. After a barrage of lawsuits, Laemmle retaliated against the distribution stranglehold by deciding to produce his own films outside of the MPPC's jurisdiction, forming the Independent Moving Picture Company, or IMP, in 1909. Laemmle had moved to New York City by this time. The IMP's first production was Hiawatha, a one-reel adaptation of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem, The Song of Hiawatha. In 1911, Laemmle expanded his operations to the West Coast by purchasing the Nestor Studio in Hollywood. By April 1912, Laemmle brought together Pat Powers of Powers Motion Picture Company, Mark Denton Fass of Champion Film Company, William Swanson of Rex Motion Picture Company, David Horsley of Nestor Film Company, and Charles Bauman and Adam Kessel of the New York Motion Picture Company to merge with IMP as the Universal Film Manufacturing Company, with Laemmle assuming the role of president. The company was founded with studios in Fort Lee, New Jersey. With studios on both coasts now, Laemmle decided to centralize all operations and began buying up real estate in Los Angeles. The West Coast offered haven from the reach of the Eastern Trusts, but also offered Southern California's warm climate and diverse topography. The Universal Film Manufacturing Company operated out of the former Bison Studio in the town of Edendale, just north of downtown Los Angeles, and the Nestor Studio in Hollywood. 2 years later, in 1914, Laemmle's Western manager, Isidore Bernstein, purchased a 230-acre ranch for $165,000 in the San Fernando Valley, a short distance from the spot where the Treaty of Cahuenga was signed in 1846 by Mexican General Andre Pico and U.S. Colonel John Fremont. This was the treaty that allowed for California's statehood. The area was nothing more than dusty wilderness then, but that was exactly what Laemmle wanted, a place on which to build an entire movie-making city. Eventually, Laemmle bought out all of his partners and their various companies, thus giving him complete control of one major organization encompassing all facets of movie production, distribution, and presentation. On March 15, 1915, Carl Laemmle held the grand opening of Universal City Studios, the world's first self-contained motion picture production community. Film production on the lot actually began the year before, with Damon and Pythias being the first motion picture completed at Universal City. Lon Chaney had an uncredited role as a wild man in the picture, alongside filmmaker Hal Roach as an extra, who created the Our Gang theatrical shorts, starring the Little Rascals. Among the 10,000 guests in attendance at the grand opening of Universal City was Buffalo Bill Cody, one of the most famous figures of the American Old West. It wasn't long until the studio housed some 500 residents, including a mayor and council, police chief, fire department, hospital, a group of American Indians who lived in teepees, and a private zoo. Laemmle had since gained the nickname Uncle Carl, partially due to his cheerful demeanor and smile, and partially due to his nepotism. But we'll get to that later. Carl even opened Universal City to the general public, charging 25 cents a head to watch movies being made, effectively creating the first studio tour. By 1930, the original studio tour was discontinued due to the advent of sound films and the stages not being sufficiently soundproof. Universal became the largest studio in Hollywood, and remained so for a decade. However, it sought an audience, mostly in small towns, producing mostly inexpensive melodramas, westerns, which were Laemmle's personal favorites, and serials. In 1916, Universal formed a 3-tier branding system for their motion picture releases. Most top-tier film studios at the time owned their own theaters to distribute and market their films. Universal did not own any theaters. By branding their pictures, Universal gave theater owners and audiences a quick reference guide. Universal's 3 types of feature motion pictures were red feather photo plays, low-budget feature films, bluebird photo plays, which were mainstream feature releases and more ambitious productions, and jewels, prestige motion pictures featuring high budgets using prominent actors. Directors of jewel films included Jack Conway, John Ford, Rex Ingram, Robert Z. Leonard, George Marshall, and Lois Weber, one of the few women at the time directing films in Hollywood. Beginning in the mid-1920s, Universal branded its 4th tier and most expensive and heavily promoted feature films as Super Jewel productions. These films include such classics as Erich von Stroheim's Foolish Wives in 1922, Clarence Brown's The Acquittal in 1923, the studio's most successful silent film, Wallace Worsley's The Hunchback of Notre Dame in late 1923, Hobart Henley's A Lady of Quality in 1924, Harry A. Pollard's Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1927, and Edward Sloman's Surrender in 1928. Laemmle was an extremely cautious studio chief. I mentioned earlier that Universal did not have its own theater chain. Rivals Adolf Zucker of Paramount Pictures, William Fox of Fox Film Corporation, which would evolve into 20th Century Fox, and Marcus Lau of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer each developed their own respective theater chains. Laemmle financed all of Universal's films himself, refusing to go into debt. This risky policy nearly bankrupted the studio when actor-director Erich von Stroheim insisted on an excessively lavish production for his films Blind Husbands in 1919 and Foolish Wives in 1922. Universal gained a return on some of its investment by launching sensational ad campaigns to attract audiences. Lon Chaney became a major draw for Universal in the mid-1910s, appearing regularly in the studio's drama pictures. Still, Chaney left Universal in 1917 due to a salary dispute, going on to star in films for Paramount and MGM. Chaney would return to Universal for arguably his 2 most famous roles, in The Hunchback of Notre Dame in 1923 and The Phantom of the Opera in 1925. While Chaney was a massive draw for moviegoers, behind the scenes at Universal, one of the most important men in the history of Hollywood and cinema was making a name for himself. One Irving Thalberg. Irving Grant Thalberg was born on May 30th, 1899 in Brooklyn, New York, to German-Jewish immigrant parents William and Henrietta. Shortly after his birth, he was diagnosed with blue baby syndrome, caused by a congenital disease that limited the oxygen supply to his heart. Doctors and specialists believed Irving may make it to the age of 20, or at most, to 30. Irving began having attacks of chest pain, dizziness, and fatigue while in his high school years. Though a good student, his chronic illness affected his studies. At the age of 17, he contracted rheumatic fever and was confined to bed for a year. In order to prevent him from falling behind, his mother brought him homework from school, along with books and tutors to teach him at home. With little else to keep him occupied or entertained, Thalberg read books as a main hobby. He read classics, popular novels, plays, and biographies, leading to interest in classical philosophy. He finished high school, but lacked the stamina to attend college. Instead, he worked part-time jobs as a store clerk, and at night, to gain some job skills, taught himself how to type, shorthand, and Spanish at a vocational school. When he turned 18 in 1917, he placed an advertisement in the local newspaper, hoping to find better work. It read, Situation wanted: secretary, stenographer, Spanish, English, high school education, no experience, $15. As fate would have it, Thalberg found work as an office secretary at Universal Pictures' New York office, eventually becoming personal secretary to Carl Laemmle. Among Thalberg's duties were transcribing and editing notes that Laemmle had written during screenings of his films. He earned $25 a week, becoming adept at making insightful observations, impressing Laemmle. After a time, Laemmle took Thalberg to Los Angeles to visit Universal City, where he spent a month watching and learning how movie production worked. Laemmle returned to New York, instructing Thalberg to keep an eye on things for me. 2 months later, Laemmle returned, partly to see how well Thalberg was able to handle the responsibilities he was given. Thalberg greatly impressed Laemmle with his insight and offered suggestions. Quote, "The first thing you should do is establish a new job of studio manager and give him the responsibility of watching day-to-day operations." End quote. Laemmle immediately agreed. Quote, "All right, you're it." End quote. Thalberg replied in surprise. Quote, "I'm what?" End quote. Thalberg took charge of the Los Angeles studio in early 1919 at the age of 20, becoming responsible for overseeing the current 9 films in production, as well as the nearly 30 projects in development. Thalberg has often been referred to as a prodigy, being dubbed the Boy Wonder due to his youth and ability to select or tweak scripts, choose the right actor for the right role, gather and motivate production staff, and make profitable films. Earlier, I mentioned Universal's near bankruptcy due to the excessive spending of actor-director Erich von Stroheim on his production of Foolish Wives in 1922. Thanks to the insight of young Thalberg, the course was corrected, much to the chagrin of von Stroheim. Thalberg proved he was more than able to put up his dukes for the sake of the studio. He was forced to have the director quickly finalize production before the studio's working capital was used up. This led to a famous confrontation between Thalberg and von Stroheim. Thalberg called von Stroheim to his office, who arrived still wearing his film costume as a Russian Imperial Guard, escorted by members of his production team. Thalberg calmly told him, "I have seen all the film, and you have all you need for the picture. I want you to stop shooting." To which von Stroheim replied, "But I have not finished yet." "Yes, you have," said Thalberg. "You have spent all the money this company can afford. I cannot allow you to spend any more." Thalberg quietly explained that the director worked under the producer, and it was his responsibility to control costs. Von Stroheim, surrounded by his assistants, threatened Thalberg, saying, "If you were not my superior, I would smash you in the face." To which Thalberg replied unflinchingly with, "Don't let that stop you." Thalberg shortly afterwards removed the cameras from von Stroheim's studio and took over editing himself. The uncut footage was pared down from 5.5 hours to 3 hours, much to von Stroheim's dismay. A similar situation presented itself with von Stroheim's next film, Merry-Go-Round, in 1923. Von Stroheim had assured Thalberg that he would remain within budget, but the production went twice the agreed length and was still not yet near completion. Historians speculate that von Stroheim believed it unthinkable to be fired, or that he could simply go over Thalberg's head to Laemmle if the issue was pressed. Surely the studio would want to keep one of its most prestigious directors happy. Once again, Thalberg called von Stroheim to his office, handed him a long letter explaining the problems, and fired von Stroheim on the spot. This marked the first time a director had been fired. It sent shockwaves through the entertainment world. Director Ruben Mamalian, who would go on to direct the 1931 version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, stated, "The little fellow at Universal, in one bold stroke, had asserted the primacy of the studio over the director." forever altering the balance of power in the movie industry. Thalberg's youth was often the subject of much conversation within the film community. It shocked many, often being mistaken as a junior employee. Oftentimes, folks believed it was a joke, but after a few minutes, everyone's tune would change. He gained the respect of all he came into contact with due to his brilliance, insights, calm demeanor, and final say. Under Thalberg's guidance, Universal's films greatly improved. Another of his gifts was an uncanny sense of story. He introduced the requirement that scripts be tightly constructed before filming began, rather than during production. He worked closely with actors, casting them for roles that suited them, and advising them on their careers. After producing numerous films that were in production when he began work at Universal, Thalberg presented Laemmle with his idea for a film based on one of his favorite classic stories, that he likely read while he was bedridden, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. In order to convince Laemmle, Thalberg pitched it as a love story. Meanwhile, Lon Chaney had been wanting to play Quasimodo in an adaptation for years. Bolstered by Chaney's recent box office successes, Laemmle agreed to the film. After nearly 3 years with Universal, Thalberg had supervised over 300 movies, reorganized the studio to give more control to the producers, and had prevented many of their leading stars from leaving by offering better and higher-paying contracts. With all that being said, it was time for Thalberg to part ways with Universal. In Los Angeles, Thalberg soon partnered with Louis B. Mayer's new studio, and, after it merged with 2 other studios, helped create Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, or MGM. He was made the head of production of MGM in 1925 at the age of 26, helping MGM become the most successful studio in Hollywood, surpassing Universal. During his tenure at MGM, he produced 400 films, including such timeless classics as Grand Hotel in 1932, China Seas, A Night at the Opera, and Mutiny on the Bounty, all in 1935, Camille in 1936, and The Good Earth in 1937. In addition, Thalberg also co-authored the Production Code, which were guidelines for censorship and morality followed by all studios, also known as the Hays Code. Thalberg helped discover many new movie stars and groom their screen images. Among them were the likes of Lon Chaney, Greta Garbo, John Gilbert, Lionel Barrymore, Joan Crawford, Clark Gable, Jean Harlow, Spencer Tracy, and Norma Shearer, who became his wife. Thalberg passed away on September 14, 1936, at the age of 37, after a bout of pneumonia. News of his untimely passing stunned not only the movie industry, but the nation as a whole. His funeral attracted thousands of spectators who came to pay their respects, as well as view the arrival of countless stars, such as Greta Garbo, the Marx Brothers, Charlie Chaplin, Walt Disney, Howard Hughes, Al Jolson, Gary Cooper, Carole Lombard, and Douglas Fairbanks. The ushers included Clark Gable, Frederick March, and playwright Moss Hart. Even Erich von Stroheim came to pay his respects. Among the condolences that came from world leaders, President Franklin D. Roosevelt wrote, "The world of art is poorer with the passing of Irving Thalberg. His high ideals, insight, and imagination went into the production of his masterpieces." Needless to say, the vast importance of Irving Thalberg is still being felt in the entertainment world to this very day. His legacy is unparalleled. Now, the stage is set for the monster pictures to begin. Carl Laemmle and Universal Studios were ready for their biggest spectacle yet, all thanks to the imagination of a young prodigy who saw the potential for one story to rise high above the expectations of potential audiences. Irving Thalberg had pitched Victor Hugo's classic 1831 novel as a production that could rise artistically above the otherwise expensive productions at Universal. The bells were ringing, and the next super jewel was ready to change the world. Join us next episode as we cover what many consider the first Universal monster film, 1923's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. This episode of the Monster Archives was written and produced by me, Ian Bates. For more on the Monster Archives, including scheduling updates and news, be sure to follow @Universal Studios Monsters on Instagram. And thank you for listening.